My name is Mertins. I'm an English instructor at Metropolitan Community College. I've been full-time at Metro for 12 years, and before that I was adjunct faculty. I did a lot before I came here. So I was adjunct faculty around different colleges, universities, but before that I did a lot of warehouse work and grocery stores and all those sorts of things. One of my favorite parts of before I started teaching of the work was, I remember I loaded trucks. We would load and unload trucks, and I remember unloading trucks during the summertime, how just hot it could get in those trucks, and the teamwork it would take to get that job done, and the sense of accomplishment. I love that sense of accomplishment, leaving work, that it felt good. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. I went to Ralston High School here in Omaha, and then I went to University of Nebraska at Omaha. I double majored in English and philosophy, and then I did my graduate work at University of Nebraska at Omaha as well, as in English, and then I taught at UNO, I taught at Creighton, I taught here as adjunct for a while before I was hired full-time here at Metro Community College. At Ralston High School, I had a teacher named Jan Rowley, and I had her a few times, but she was, when I think back of what got me into English, I remember her classes. I think that's where I really fell in love with words and language. It was in her class. I remember reading several things. I remember reading a short story by Ambrose Bierce, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. We read it, and then in class we watched a film version of it. And I remember just being heartbroken at the end of it, but of course not wanting to show that as a high school male, as a student. And I also remember her reading Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven to us as a class, and normally that's not something, I was probably at the time more concerned in my head with how to hit a curveball later that night at baseball. But that night I took my book home and I read that poem over and over and over again. I got to the point where I memorized. And so I really fell in love with language and words, the sounds of words. And so that's someone that comes to mind. When I was at University of Nebraska at Omaha, there was a professor there named Steve Newman. And I think the last time I talked to him, he's at Temple University now, but he was the first professor I had, a really person who kind of sat me down and asked me, what are you doing? What are you going to do in the future? And he really gave me a lot of confidence in myself, which I don't think I had. He kind of set me on the direction that I am now about, offered teaching as a possibility, and that it's something that I might be good at, that things he saw in class, work I had turned in, those sorts of things. So he's somebody who was very, very encouraging, and so I never forget that. I'm very grateful to him. I don't come from a family of educators. I think what set me on a path to education was education itself, especially when I got into my later undergraduate and graduate studies. I really fell in love with the subject matter. I got very passionate about the subject matter. And the subject matter itself, one way to maintain that passion after I was done studying was to become a teacher. I think it's just a love of learning was what kept me teaching. What keeps me at MCC are the students, the diversity of students, the different backgrounds, belief systems, values that they bring to the discussions, to their work, just to the classroom. Their dedication, their motivation, that's what I think keeps me coming. Sometimes I feel like I get more out of classes than they do sometimes. I think that's, and the students keep me at Metro, and also my colleagues. I think I have wonderful colleagues who are very passionate about student and student success too. Especially, I feel like my department, that's one of the things that guides our department is, what's in the best interest of the student, and that's always in the forefront of any guiding principles we have. A saying, it's a Chinese proverb, I think if I remember right, that it says, "Tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand, and learn." And I think that's really what guides my teaching is the more active you can make it. And I think as an instructor, that's a balance. Every instructor, how to balance presentation, lecture, whatever that might be, with active student involvement. I think is the challenge of any teacher. And I think the more active, the more I think passionately you can present the material, and the more you can have students actively engage, apply the material to their own lives. That's what I try to do in my classroom. Every class is different, so that means you can teach a section of a class, but every class of students, of individuals that comes in is different, and they bring different, again, attitudes, belief systems. As the years go on, students, and as I get older and become less part of, they're a much younger generation than I am, so I learn just as much from them as I feel hopefully they do from me. So I think that's one of the things that gets me up and gets me coming to Metro every day. It's just a great atmosphere. It's a great atmosphere for learning, for ideas, for discussion, just for higher learning. The one thing I want students to take away from it is whatever the subject matter is, I want them to walk out with an understanding in their own words of that subject matter, of understanding what it is, what it means to them, and how they can apply that to their own lives. I feel it's more than just memorizing, memorizing dates and those sorts of things. A lot of times you walk out of the classroom and those things evaporate from your mind, but if a student can find some way that the course content or the subject matter, whatever it is, connects to their lives and has meaning in their lives, and they're more apt to get something out of it. I was passionate about the subject matter, the course content that I taught. I really am. Reading and writing, thinking, ideas are things I'm very, very passionate about. I hope they remember that I was passionate about their own learning. I really do want them to understand, and again, not understand it the way I do, but their own way, in a way that they can make sense of it and apply it to their own lives. Technology really, especially obviously for the younger generations, is the medium of their communication. So I think it's greatly affected what our students are bringing to the class. I do teach online classes, and I did a revision of one of our online classes to update it with more sort of media, with more active sort of engagement. The class that was probably a decade old. I think time management is probably my greatest challenge. Like you said, family, balancing family and your own personal life, as well as your teaching, your professional life is a balance. It's only 24 hours in a day, and that's always a challenge. I have a wife, I have 2 boys who I'm very involved in their lives. But I also like to read, I like to write myself. I love poetry, I love to write poetry, to read poetry, to read, about writing poetry, anything along those lines, anything sort of creative writing I'm interested in. There is more in us than we know, and I think that is something that all the classes that I teach, that I feel they're successful when the students come away with confidence in something, a skill or an ability that they didn't realize that they had, that there really is more in us than we're aware of, and once we realize that, how empowering that can be, and want us to just go further. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. As far as fiction, I think Walt Whitman's probably the poet that most affected me, and the poet who I still read today and I still feel very deeply. There's other poets that I read younger that don't affect me the same way, but Whitman, he seems to connect with me even more now than he did when I was an undergraduate or graduate student. I think what's next for me is to continue to develop the classes that I teach. People are always changing, I'm always changing, and I want the classes that I teach to be timely, to speak to the students and to speak to me as well. I change, they change, and so to stay on top of that is I think that's important to me. I'm Brett Mertins, English faculty at Metropolitan Community College's Elkhorn Valley campus.